Well, welcome back to another episode of Soul Focus Radio. We're your hosts, Martina and
Martin.
Sorry, I was thinking you were going to go first.
You know what? I could have. And, just for our listeners, I mean, our names are basically the same with just the differences in A. So I should have jumped in and said Martin, but I'm comfortable. I'm comfortable with how it went.
Well, what's funny, I don't think our listeners know, we've shared before that your middle name is Moses.
Close, very close. My middle name is Lee, which is that's my English middle name, or, American, I guess. And that actually, so the Jewish tradition, I was named after my Aunt Leah, who was a favorite aunt of my mother's. But my Hebrew name is Moshe. Mm-hmm. No worries. My Hebrew name is Moshe, which means Moses in English. But my parents did not want to name me Moses. They were kind of intimidated by having a Moses in 1963. It would have been interesting for me to go through life as Moses at that age, in that era. But so that's the story of my name.
Well, and my partner, my husband's name is Moses.
Yes, it is.
We have a lot of name overlaps.
I definitely feel a kinship to your husband from the name. Is there anything about your name since we stumbled upon this as in our intro? Is there anything about your name you want to share?
Well, I was named after my grandfather, and so they didn't know if I was going to be a boy or a girl. So I would have been Martin had I been a boy. And since I was born female and I continue to identify as female, my name is Martina.
That was easy for them and for you.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and it's a nice name. I like the name. So cool. So let's set up today's episode at all before we get going?
Yeah, so we're going to be continuing our conversation today with Dr. Neelo and with Cyndi. We started last week talking about healing from childhood trauma, and we're going to continue that conversation with a little bit more of a focus on how do we heal from secondary trauma and what's the role. Dr. Neelo and I work in healthcare, and so that's our perspective, but it's definitely something that anyone can experience when relating and connecting with somebody who has gone through a trauma. And so we'll be talking about how does it manifest when we don't acknowledge that secondary trauma, and how do we heal and show up more human?
Yeah, and it was an amazing conversation. I mentioned in the last episode that you all were very grounded, and I would add to this, in this episode, very human. Sometimes, looking at what the three of you do, you working on a indigenous reservation, and Dr. Neelo working with pediatrics, which is often in areas in New York, which are, have a lot of challenges going on. And then Cyndi, who I've known the longest, and I know what she does well, works with some of the most challenging traumatic situations that you could work with. So the fact that, given the background of all three of you, and you all remain grounded, and you also really, I think, express your humanity and how you have to maintain, I hate the word professionalism because we know it's such a loaded word, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to maintain the ability to do your job really well and also be able to maintain your humanity simultaneously.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's the challenge of there's the moments we have to put our emotions aside to do our job. And then we need to make sure we come back and bring our wholeness back to process and to be with our patients and with their families.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I say, let's go. Let's listen.
All right, let's do this.
At the Soul Focus Group, we're probably one of the first organizations in the social justice movement to find ourselves moving away from fighting against racism to creating human solidarity. What we found is that we could fight 24 hours, 48 hours, or all our lives, and after fighting all this time, we have nothing to show for it. It's because we haven't created anything for ourselves. At the Soul Focus Group, we are one of the few organizations who have moved from fighting against racism to creating an alternative to racism. And we invite you to join us. Let's stop fighting and start creating the outcome we really want to experience.
So I think we've been having such a rich conversation both around defining what trauma is, because like we've said, our society doesn't really talk about trauma. And I can't say that I had a really clear definition until our conversation with you, Cyndi, a couple weeks ago. Understanding how trauma can manifest, what even can be trauma, because I think that some might argue that, gosh, is race, like some people might say racism isn't trauma, poverty isn't trauma. And then starting to talk a little bit about how do we heal from trauma and what does that look like? All of us, Neelo, Cyndi, myself, even so many folks in the Soul Focus group outside of the medical field too, are experiencing many forms of secondary trauma. And so I'd love for us to have a conversation about, in each of our own journeys, what has it looked like for us in terms of holding that space, or even sometimes not being able to hold that space to support the people we work with, our families, our community, and how are we making sure that we're staying connected to our wholeness, staying connected to our spirituality, and creating those supportive and dependable relationships.
Yeah, Martina, I love the question because we rarely talk about the impact that that the experience of witnessing and bearing witness to people's I don't want to call it suffering, but I want to call it their experience, because I don't necessarily want to label that for them, but watching folks struggle, like what does that feels really, really heavy. And we were talking previously, the three of us, just about the fact that we have not necessarily been trained on how to hold it, right, to be able to hold space. And I'm thinking about the concept of secondary and vicarious trauma as being sort of in some ways it feels like it lessens the impact, the language, but it really is a trauma in and of itself. And so one of the things that I remember one of my first supervisors, and I want to say her name because I think it's important. Her name was Connie Guerrero, and actually, Neelo, you may know Connie, and she was my first supervisor in graduate school. And I remember when I had my interview with her for my internship, she said, "You're really smart," which I would argue with her about today. But she said, "You're very smart, but I wonder if you can remain emotionally in the moment with your clients." And it was such a challenge because I always thought that, in order to be an effective clinician, I had to think my way through. But it wasn't until I started to really face the experiences of that I had as a child, right? That my own history of trauma, my own history of stress, my own history of uncertainty and instability, that I could really remain emotionally in the moment. So it took a lot of work from my own individual to really anchor into my own experiences, to then be able to be emotionally in the moment, emotionally sober, and hold space for folks who are also struggling. So I'll never forget Connie asking me that question and me becoming very, very upset with her, because I was like, well, I'm smart enough to do this work, right? But what it really meant was really digging back into my own experiences, getting clear with why I was doing the work that I was doing, and then being able to sit and hold space after that. So yeah, that's what keeps me grounded today is that experience. So I wanted to just bring that in.
That's amazing. I think I can echo that in my professional development as well. I think we come out of med school and you're in fellowship and you have developed all the thought pathways and the diagnostic trees and everything that you need to do. And really, it's that integration between that and the heart, right? Our empathy is my biggest tool that I have. And, I think a lot of times in medical training, the focus is to be objective so you could be a better clinician. And that makes you a better diagnostician. But what makes me a really good doctor and a really good pediatrician is my heart and my empathy, and integrating those two and really being present and in the moment for every patient. And as you were saying before, Martina, it is really difficult when you have 15-minute slots for patients and you feel the pressures of the world around you, like kind of knocking on the door of that exam room as you're in there. But I have learned with experience and just to kind of sit in there and wait. When I have a teenager who clearly is in pain and is struggling and is not, able to speak about it in a quick fashion, I just hold that space, and whatever I need to do to be there in that moment is important, because that's going to impact what happens next for her or for him. And that is sort of the thing that I've learned, and that keeps me whole too, because that's my authentic self, being able to. And I feel like we're taught not to share our own stories. And I think that's what makes us human, and that's what allows us to connect, and for our patients to see us as humans and to connect with us and to understand that we're all in this beautiful mess together. And you choose your moments and you choose your stories, but I think that that's also one of our superpowers, is to be able to connect on that level and say, look, we're all going through this. We're in it together. And that helps me stay grounded, and also having these conversations with all of you and professionals, and sort of buffering that secondary trauma, and just kind of acknowledging, like, wow, this is really tough. I had a tough day, and having that person to kind of talk to about it, so that you can release it as much as you need to, or as possible.
Wow, just thank you both for sharing that. I do want to share where I'm at in this journey, but first I have a question for both of you. I think because I'm a little, I think, early in that journey of making that transition. I'm only 2 years out of my residency, where, like you mentioned, Neelo, we're sort of, I feel like we're rewarded in medical school and residency for being tough, for not showing emotion, for not sleeping really long and working really long,
Right.
and not showing that you're tired. Like, those are the rewarding pieces. And so I think I'm still healing from that process and that socialization. So I guess my question for both of you is, what I heard was that you made a journey of, in your work, being with people in the space from your brain, and then you move to your heart and to your spirit. And I'm wondering if that was hard.
It was, and it wasn't, right? Because it's our authentic self. And what you just talked about, Martina, was, denying that we need sleep, denying that we need food, denying that we have emotions. We're denying that we're human, right? But like, we're doing the most human thing. We're taking care of people at their most vulnerable moments. Like, what's more human than that? And how can we deny our hearts, and how can we not lead with our hearts in that journey? I think that is the most important thing. And I understand from like I was a sociology major in college, so I understand from a sociological perspective, like the need in medical school. It's almost like the military. They kind of deprogram you to reprogram you so that you can do the difficult stuff when kids are really sick or adults are really sick, and you need to just kind of divorce yourself of your emotion to do your job in that moment. But then you have to reconnect with it. I mean, when I was doing my child abuse fellowship, I would go to the ER in the middle of the night, take care of a patient, and then release the tears on the way home. Like, I had to feel the emotions. In the moment I couldn't, but I had to feel those emotions, and not doing so, I think, would have caused me to really burn out, or get sick, or who knows. But I think connecting with that humanness is really so important, and that vulnerability that we all have, because otherwise the triggering aspects of this too, of doing this work in our own lives, the traumas that we've survived and we're healing from and continue to heal from. I think it's got to be an acknowledgement of that too, and that's the only way to move forward, is by leading from the heart.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I just want to like hold how important that statement around we're doing the most human work. Like, that is, we're doing human work. And if we are not acknowledging the humans in human work, then that we're doing a disservice to ourselves and our clients or our patients. I would say, like, it's super, super hard, because the thing about being authentic and being vulnerable and connecting to our authentic selves is that somehow we have been conditioned in our society in general to believe that there is something inherently wrong with us, like we're not enough in our most raw and authentic form. And I think that that's problematic. And I'm not just talking about that as social workers or as physicians, but I'm talking about, the socialization that we give to our young people, to our loved ones, to people around us. And so we have to kind of walk back from there, and we have to start to say, like, who we are at our core is enough. And not only is it enough, but it is exceptional. And it is the thing, as Neelo, as you said, that's going to make us really, really good carers and healers and folks who intervene and connect and all the things that we want to be in the world. But first, we have to walk back that socialization that has told us that we're not enough, and that there is only one right way to do this. And that dichotomy, that dichotomous thinking that's so deeply rooted in white culture, in dominant culture, in white organizational culture, that there's only one way to do things. We have to unearth that. We have to unpack that. There isn't, right? Because we're unique beings with unique experiences, and we have to then meet each other in a unique space. And so I just want to hold that it is hard, because you have to constantly be really clear and honest with yourself that you are enough in this work, that you are doing it to the best of your ability because you're bringing your fullest and wholest self. But that is pushed back on by the way that we've been socialized and by, many systems and institutions. And that's just part of it. But that's part of the practice that we get into. Dustin Washington, who's, many people have heard his voice on these podcasts, always says, I'm trying to move away from using the word work. Martin, you've said the same thing. We're trying to move away from the word work and call it practice. Well, this is the practice. We're enough. Our authentic selves are enough in this.
Yeah. And Cyndi, when you were saying we've been taught that there's one way and there's one right way, and I think what our society, and so often, like you said, kind of the white dominant society, is saying that the right way is the brain way. The right way is when we can try to logic our way through something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the truth of the matter is yes, like, logic is important to balance, but to balance with our creativity, with the things that make us really brilliant and geniuses in our own right. And what makes us brilliant and geniuses is what we bring to it, is our own sort of natural expression of ourselves. Like, that is what creativity is about. And there's no more creative process than healing arts, right? That whether it's medicine, whether it's mental health treatment, whether it's whatever it is that we're doing, it has to be creative. And creativity does not come from a one way approach. It has to come from our natural expression of self. That's our genius.
Right on. And looping that back into like healing from childhood trauma. And one of the ways we do that is, I spoke about safe, stable, nurturing relationships. What that means is in a developing child, being that mirror, right? Like, there's that serve and return process for a child. Like, they cry, and if the caregiver kind of modulates their expression, the baby mirrors that. And we know that from a very early age that happens. And that's really important in developing and regulating their emotions. So when we talk about being our authentic selves and being centered in the heart and feeling the humanness of it all, that's really how we do that for children in terms of healing from trauma. Is that emotional regulation that we teach them as caregivers, that we're able to model for them in terms of our own emotions, but then also there's an active process that we do in terms of raising children and taking them through that process. And I'll do it for you. I'll do it with you. I'll watch you do it, and then you do it on your own, right? And we do that for skills like walking, and we do that for emotions too. It's just as important to do it for emotions and naming the emotions. Even saying, what color is that emotion? Is that warm or is it cold? How does it feel? Like, really giving life to it so that they understand what those emotions are and how that impacts them in their bodies. I even go with my kids, like, how does that feel? Like, what does it mean to be stressed? How does that feel in your body? What do you feel when you're stressed? Does your breathing get quicker? Do you feel like you can't sit down, that you can't sit still? What happens in your body? How do you know you're stressed? And then what do you do to make yourself feel better? What calms you down? Do you listen to music? Do you go for a run? Do you talk to a friend? Going through those things so that they can start understanding. We talk about mind-body connection all the time, but what does that really mean? And in like the nitty-gritty, and how do you then handle that? And those little interactions, those little things that we can model, we don't have to wait for the big things, when it's a big event or a big adverse event. It's just kind of building that resilience and those kinds of skills in the everyday. And so I try to bring that into the exam room with my patients as I'm talking to them about school and different things and social relationships and all the normal things, but kind of build that in there, and model it for the parents as well in terms of how to speak to kids about those kinds of things. Because unless it was done for us, unless we were taught, we don't necessarily know how to do it either. So it's an important sort of serve and return that goes on, and that emotional regulation, just bringing it back to the healing piece, is super important as well.
When you come to the Soul Focus Group, you come to an acknowledgement that there has been injuries done to us from all these different forms of oppression. Injuries that have impacted our subconscious mind, our heart, our spirit, our very soul. So at the Soul Focus Group, we recognize that and we focus on healing. Healing, the return or the recovery of our connections to our healthy self, our beautiful thinking mind. We want you to come join us in a movement of healing all around the world to restore us back to our rightful state. At the Soul Focus Group, we heal.
Neelo, I feel like just now you were modeling for me as a new mom.
Oh,
Yeah, how do I help my kiddo who's, she's turning 1 next week, so she's not quite talking, but so much of what you said of like she is in that phase where she is just mimicking everything we
yes,
do. And so
yes.
I just want to thank you because I feel like you were giving me teaching and modeling of, okay, how do I start to manifest these feelings, the things that we've been socialized to not give voice or give space to, and how do I start that right now? Because she is just soaking up everything around her.
Yes, absolutely. And that the feelings are real, and that there's nothing wrong with feeling sad or mad or glad. Those are all beautiful human emotions and should be felt. And it's about regulating them, right? And kind of, okay, this is how we deal with this emotion, and this is how we, but this is what it is. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Like I'm really moved by our conversation and inspired by both of you sharing with me a little bit how you've moved from your brain to your hearts and embraced your authentic self. I think, for me, motherhood has been a really big transition point in my role as a physician. And it's been really interesting because I exactly like what Cyndi said, when you said we're doing the most human work, really resonated with me. Because I think, and I don't know your experiences, but when I came back from maternity leave, it's a very visible thing that I go through of becoming pregnant and then coming back not pregnant and having, a child. And so it was something that my patients really were able to ask me a lot about. That's very personal. And I found myself really transforming to share so much more about my own personal life, my own personal journey, and my own struggles and joys of being a mom and being a working mom. And it has really transformed my relationships with patients, both my joy. So I feel less stress when I'm running super behind because I'm just really connecting with people. And the other thing that's been really profound is, and I'm sure you see this too, Cyndi, in social work, is that people I think are showing up more human. We all feel embarrassed about sharing with our providers or with people things that are going on in our life, or at least I can say there's things I'm embarrassed to share with a provider. And so what I've found is that as I'm showing up more human and vulnerable and complete in that exam room, I'm finding my patients saying, I was too embarrassed to tell you this, but and just being able to have a much richer relationship and much more comprehensively being able to provide resources for what they're truly going through outside of that exam room.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I just want to thank both Neelo and Cyndi. Thank you so much for coming on, sharing your experiences, sharing your expertise, sharing your wisdom. I know that I'll be listening back to this podcast on repeat because there's so much that I need to absorb and learn from. And I'm super excited to start integrating a lot of these pieces in my personal life and in my professional life.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor to be here, and this conversation has been healing for me. And I'm so happy to be a part of something like this.
This has been an awesome opportunity again, and to be back, and Martina, to deepen our conversation, and Neelo, to have you here is just like a dream.
Aww.
So I'm just really appreciative of you both. And what I'm taking away from this conversation is that there's a lot of hope that I walk away with, because this conversation and hearing the amazing work, Martina, that you and Neelo do reminds me that there's hope, and that there is a process and a journey to this healing that you can shepherd for us. So thank you both very, very, very much.
Thank you, Cyndi. I'm very humbled to be a part of the conversation with both of you, and really, both of your expertise. I know for me, kind of the two things I'm taking away is, I think one was really recognizing experiences or events or, physical manifestations as, like you said, sort of the guideposts for trauma. So taking that time and holding that space to look deeper. And I'm really hoping to give myself the space to really acknowledge and recognize and hold space for myself, hold space for my patients, hold space for my community. And I'm really seeing that as a piece I'm going to be working on and taking away from our conversation today. So thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
So have you ever heard of a term called groundwater? Groundwater is another word we use at the Soul Focus Group that means subconscious programming. From the ages of 0 to 7, we are subconsciously programmed. So much information and choices and decisions are downloaded into our subconscious mind, and we begin to start living that life. And even though that life we're living is not the life we chose for ourselves, and it's not until we understand the impact of the groundwater, what the groundwater really is, that we begin to wake up to our own lives and begin to choose what we want for ourselves. At the Soul Focus Group, we bring you to that consciousness so that you can begin to choose the life you want to live for yourself.
All right. Well, that was another incredibly rich and wonderful conversation. You know, the old saying, Martina, like you want to be a fly on the wall, right? Mm-hmm. I heard a comedian say the other day, why would anyone want to be a fly on the wall? Because flies can't actually hear. So you would never hear anything. But the spirit of it, I do feel that way. I feel like I get to really sort of eavesdrop on these amazing conversations that you all are having. And this one was no exception. I found this conversation really fascinating, and I wanted to know what were your major takeaways from this week's conversation.
Well, I was reflecting a lot about a personal experience in a time when I really had a hard time processing my emotions. And it was right before I left for maternity leave. I was in a relatively new job. It was my first job out of residency, so kind of a new weight of responsibility. And I definitely think I was experiencing some levels of secondary trauma. I don't want to make myself feel like a victim at all, because that's not at all what I feel. And I definitely feel like it's a privilege and an honor to be in the position that I am and to have the job that I have, and to be able to connect with the people that I do as patients, as colleagues. But I definitely saw how not being able to bring my full self and not being able to give the time to pause and reflect on just reacting in a human way to the stories that were being shared with me, how that really affected me on a personal level and affected my health. I was extremely stressed out and just extremely tired. And I would say even unhappy kind of towards the end of my pregnancy, where I was just burnt out from work. And now coming back, and I shared this, is that I feel like I'm able to bring myself in a much more human way to my patients because they know this really personal thing that happened as I gave birth. I had a baby. And so I'm able to relate on that human level. And that's opened up so many other ways in which we relate humanistically and not just in this provider-patient relationship. And I've found myself, even though I'm busier now and I'm rushing home to be with my family, so much happier and so much less burnt out. It's been a real joy and a really beautiful growth for me.
That's awesome. Yeah. I really feel that. And, I love that I love that you shared that and that you feel that connection. I'll just say, like, on a personal note, I was really able to relate, especially to where Cyndi's coming from, because, I worked in social work, and for 5 years, I was director of a transitional housing facility for people coming out of prison and reuniting with their children. And, I really got in touch with the whole secondary trauma piece, being surrounded by people experiencing that trauma all the time. So listening to your conversation and really being able to just kind of sink into that spot of, like, you all didn't like talk a whole lot about self-care using those words, but I did think there was kind of a theme of what you all do to take care of yourselves. Did you get that sense from the conversation as well?
Absolutely. And I think also not dividing self-care from work, that we can take care of ourselves in our jobs by showing up as a human and get strength and energy and purpose by building those human relationships.
Right. Yeah, I felt that. I really did. It was a wonderful conversation, and I'm really excited to let our listeners really reflect on what they heard today, and to, invite each and every one of you who listened today to please share this. I think, Martina, we did this before with a conversation with you and Megan, and with you and Dustin, but I really, really strongly encourage people in the healthcare, the medical care professions to really listen to these series of podcasts that we're doing, because this is a window and an access into healthcare providers that I don't think most people get.
Yeah, please share with your communities. It's important conversations that we often don't make time for in healthcare.
Absolutely. So share with healthcare providers, but also share with people that are impacted by healthcare providers, which is really all of us, or, a very, very high percentage of us, one way or another, we're going to be impacted. So we thank each and every one of you for being on this journey. We want you to be healthy. We want you to heal from all the different traumas that have gone on in your life, whether it be primary trauma or secondary trauma that you may have experienced. And really, most of us have in this world. So we are holding that, you and every one of you in healing and loving light, and know that we love you. We care about you. And as always, we want you to join our community, help our community expand. Go to soulfocusgroup.com, share the podcast out to whoever you want, and help us grow and reach more people. And like we always say, we want you to stay safe, stay well, and most of all, stay soul focused.